feeling a bit tired, a bit sleepy today, so it's just gonna be a quick casual commentary. Nothing too serious, just gonna talk a little bit about my thoughts on battle boots, my thoughts on wall combos in DI, apparently, that can get a bit crazy. I'm actually still alive. And just playing some good old games to learn the weapon a bit more. I don't really know what I'm gonna end up calling this. I'm gonna talk about battle boots either way. Brawlhalla Pro's opinion on battle boots. Could I even say that? Is that stolen valor? Either way, that doesn't really matter. I'll figure it out later. I'm having a lot of fun with the weapon, but I feel like it's kind of weirdly broken. What I mean is that there's some things about the weapon that are kind of not great. I would even venture to say pretty bad, honestly. And then some other things that are just completely busted. Let's start with that one, since that was just such a perfect example. Also, I swapped colors because I unlocked a new one, but now they're on my old colors. This might get a bit confusing, but either way, that sair, I mean, you saw it. The ability to kill so early, especially because you're just drawing yourself and your opponent into that blast zone, it's extremely good. And no other weapon, no other move on no other weapon has that kind of mobility and that kind of KO power. The closest is like old Scythe Nair and old Cannon Sair. But like those two now, I tried to GC downline, that probably would have been a kill. They don't hold a candle to it. It is kind of absurd what you're able to do. And because the Sair has all that power, all that utility, the downlight in turn also gets more powerful as well. The moves work really well together because of that. You have all the drift and all these active frames of that sair, like that for example, which I'm going to touch on later, so keep that in mind right there. And then you also have the freeze framing, stopping in place of this downlight that can contest someone's recovery option. And that's only considering usage in the air, not even on the ground or anything like that, because obviously a grounded combo starter is great. It's great to have, especially when you have knockouts from in the air to the ceiling, as well as horizontally, which, you know, I've been covering for the past little while with that sair there. But yeah, those active frames, let's talk about that now. I think they SD'd. I'll talk about it later. Okay, so those active frames. Also, this map is going to be interesting. I don't know how the wall combos are going to work out with this, but we'll see. Battle Boot Sair works kind of like Sword Sair, where both of the kicks are active like that. You pair that with the drift ability, like this for example, and the ability to fall down on your opponent and still hit them. It gives the impression that perhaps it has way more priority than it does, because you're getting caught out in positions where you think you probably shouldn't or probably wouldn't, but because it's active longer than you think you do. And so I suspect a lot of people that are struggling with the priority, like that for example, of the sair, it's not necessarily the priority because the disjoint isn't the biggest, but rather a combination of the priority that it does have mixed with all the active frames and then also that drift. There's also the X factor, which is I think because it locks you in for that combo every time it hits, it's gonna be more frustrating. You don't have control of your character for as long as like a hammer sair or an axe sair, so it's just gonna stick in your mind more as something that's super powerful. I am a really dumb gamer. So I suspect it's a bit of a combo, people drifting into your zone, into your area of threat, and then you think you should out-prioritize them because normally against most stuff you can, but because of all these active frames, they fall on you in a way where the hitbox is connecting and they're not getting hit, and therefore it feels like it has a lot of priority even though it might just be hitting at angles that you're not really used to. Don't get me wrong, I mean the hitbox is great, but I wouldn't necessarily say that priority is the thing that what am I doing? Priority isn't necessarily one of the things that I'd highlight as the battle boot's pinnacle of strength. I zoomed up there. That's a lot about Sair, but it really is one of those moves that has a lot going for it. You saw right there, falling with the hitbox, using that drift in order to extend where I might not have been able to get a hit previously or a hit with another weapon. I can with the battle boots there. But let's move on. Let's talk about some other stuff because I've been beating this horse a bit too far dead. Extended combos are certainly something to take a look at. Like this right here, that's a 4-piece true combo. They can DI it and it can get a bit wonky, a bit weird, but yeah, it's one of those things that I think should probably be tuned down a little bit for no other reason than even if it doesn't do the most damage, it just takes a while. Also, normally I'd cut the music here and then just put my own. I continue to be an extremely intelligent player, but I'm just gonna let it play out because I need to make a petition for BMG to adjust the sound settings on everything. I'm trying to save them there. I'm glad they did it because I almost died. Regardless, it has some other strengths. Like I said, the extended combos, KO combo like that. Nair hitbox, that's something that's pretty amazing. You saw right there, I reversed it in order to get that crescent moon. You can also do these fadeaway nairs and hit them like that. Yeah, recovery hitbox is also something. So those are the two moves. I think I might be dead. That really have all that priority. I probably could have gone for a further edge guard, but I got a bit spooked, a bit scared. But yeah, Nair's hitbox is really the strong thing about it. String-wise, it's not the greatest. Okay, this might be a bit deceiving. Just because the weapon's new, I think people aren't really used to dodging out of the Nair strings or jumping out of them like that. But that's actually a great transition into my next point, which is about some of the weaknesses of battle boots. And and why, like I said, it's kind of weirdly broken. I'll start though with talking about one of the things that is not necessarily a strength or a weakness, but just something to keep in mind and consider as you're playing against it. As time goes on, everything that's niche, everything that's kind of quirky, everything that should maybe not work, like that for example. Okay, that actually killed. Good opportunity. We can see right here that has a dodge window of 6, easily jumpable. If this opponent, there's not gonna be time. There's not gonna be time. They could have jumped out of it is the point there, but I think because it's just so new, I mean, this is still day 2 of its release. By the time this video comes out, it's probably probably still only day 3 of its release, and so there's a lot of things that we just have to get used to. But regardless, those kinds of things, those like meta adjustments, I wouldn't say that's a strength or a weakness about the weapon. It's just something that as you get more used to it, a lot of the wonky strings and stuff that you can kind of get away with just because it's unusual or new, you just won't be able to anymore. So those things like the strings, for example, as we get all used to the strings and what leads into what moves are actually coming out and which is which, and the dodge windows and where you can attack out of hit stun and all that kind of stuff, we'll get more used to that. And the vortexes will not be nearly as long. And so I think a lot of that early oppression that you might run into, or other way around, you're getting away with a lot of stuff that you know you probably shouldn't be, like me right now, it probably won't last forever. The reason why I bring all that up is because long extended strings are good, really good, for one primary thing, and that's building up a lot of damage. And a lot of damage is something that the battle boots lacks. Every single move, with the exception of these SIGs, because it's tezca SIGs, they're kind of crazy, really don't do all too much damage. And so if you no longer can do super long strings, your damage output might be kind of low. All that is not just the case with strings though, it also has to do with recovery time. As you play against the weapon more and more, you start to get used to the gaps, something like down air, where you can punish it, when you can punish it. Downlight especially is probably going to be the biggest one. Sair, maybe a little bit because of the drift, but I suspect that move might get changed in the future. We'll see how it ends up happening with that, but as people get better and have more and more time against it, all of that will slowly change. I'm sorry, this game is so jumpy, I was distracted. Something in the background. What was I saying? Lost my train of thought there. Yeah, it has low damage, so that means the strings, the recovery time, when you're hitting less moves, it's just going to be less powerful in the future. But something that I do want to say, and something else that I want to mention on its weaknesses side, some of the moves don't feel great, and notably, it's a couple of them. It's the sidelight without any active input, that one right there, that kind of locks you into place just a bit. Most of the time with that maybe being a bit of an exception because I was off stage already, the counterpart just feels way better, launching into the air, and you have all that freedom to ground pound, to dare, to continue your movement with a cider or something. It's one of those moves that feels kind of unnecessarily stagnant, and you're just stuck a little bit, and all the fluidity that you normally get is not really there when you have that normal sidelight. I think maybe it has to do with the stun. If it had more stun, it had less recovery time. With more stun, it would be different. I'm not entirely sure, but I feel like if the stun was tuned down, if that is the problem, and then it was made a little bit faster once you hit it, it would be a lot more fun. It just feels a little bit off because the rest of the kit is so fluid that just stopping in place, it doesn't feel natural with this weapon where you're kind of always moving forward with all that forward momentum. What you can do, that little trick right there, is stop people on the wall, then they grab the wall, which means they can't dodge. Then you can get a ground pound off of it, but otherwise, the amount of uses I found, it's mostly just when people don't expect it. You can kind of get a signature sometimes because they get left on the ground, but most of the time I'd much rather just be leaping into the air, and that way I just feel more fluid. Even if I don't get a combo and I whiff like that, I still keep that forward tempo and all that momentum. It's not even necessarily moving momentum, but just gameplay momentum, which I think is really nice. The other move that I feel like is a little bit weird and a little off is down air, but it's not down air itself, it's down air because of recovery. You know how I was talking about because the sair is so strong, it makes downlight stronger? I feel like it's the opposite. I feel like because recovery's distance is so weak, it makes dare weaker. Also, I'm just gonna hold this ground pound. If they hit me, they hit me. They didn't hit me. Dare does have some recovery frames. It's not a ton. It's not the most in the world, but because your recovery distance really isn't that much, it feels like it's more, because in order to get back up to where you were before, it takes more. It takes more options than it would with anything else. Or at least that's how it feels. I haven't done any of the hammer unit calculations or anything. That's Team Fortress 2. That's very different. It would be pixels in the good old BH. How it feels, though, is pretty much what a first impression is. And that might change. Who knows? I might get more used to maneuvering around with recovery, hopefully like I'm going to do here, and figure out that down air is actually insanely good for going super deep off stage. But, well, to be clear, it's not bad for going super deep off stage. In fact, it can be really great because you bounce off. It's just a bit risky. There's definitely more I want to talk about. I'm starting to get a bit of a baby headache though, so I think I'm going to call it shortly. As a bit of a recap, some of the strengths, you got that side air, for example, and that can kill extremely early. The downlight then gets a bit of a buff in turn because of that. You have some pretty ludicrous combo extensions like that, for example, where you can just net super early kills. And speaking of super early kills, that's just tezca. Also, that side sig deals like 27 damage. But on the topic of damage, some of the downsides of battle boots are that it really does not do much damage at all. And because of that, some of the long strings that you might be able to get away with now might not really last all too long, and the overall damage output of the weapon might end up suffering in the long run. But we'll see, we'll see. That's one of those things that just takes a bit of a testing. But one last point that I want to talk about before we close shop here, which might mean that I'm going to play one more game, and that's the question of, is having all these really distinct strengths and weaknesses a bad thing? Because I might have been framing it that way, although that's not really my intention. The answer is no, that's what an archetype is. That's the whole point of having a heavy character, because they're big and lumberous. That's probably not a word, but you get the idea, where they don't have great speed because they hit hard, or someone that's really fast might be really fragile. All that kind of stuff, that's totally fine, and I don't really have a problem with having distinct strengths and weaknesses. In fact, that's what makes things interesting and fun. I think it gets into the territory of kind of weird goofiness, though, when those strengths and weaknesses are very lopsided or very extreme. And I'm not saying that's necessarily the case with battle boots, but that's what it kind of feels like, again, on first impressions, which are all feel-based. It feels like both sides of the strengths and weaknesses are tipping a bit far. Like the KO power of this sair, and you could kill in just light orange if you land it kind of towards the side of the map, which you can force because you're just zooming around. You don't want to see the end of that game. It was very weird. But yeah, that kind of imbalance might lead to a situation where the optimal strategy becomes extremely cheesy, extremely one note, because the weaknesses are so weak and the strengths are so strong. I don't know, I really enjoy the weapon. I think it's designed great, it's a lot of fun, but there are some weird things like this, where you can get a kill off of literally one read, because the whole thing that led up to that brought them to the spot to get killed was a true combo. So just based off these first impressions, which again, extremely limited, completely feel-based, I think I'd probably want to see some kind of regression towards the middle, towards the mean there, where the extreme strengths are brought a bit down, and the weaknesses are lifted a bit up, in a way that still maintains the identity, which is probably the really hard part. That's it though. Like I said, my head's starting to hurt a little bit. I don't think this was the most cohesive, but it was a casual commentary. I hope you enjoyed. I'll be back with more boots very soon.